This is Locked On Sports Atlanta, and it's time for the Atlanta Football Party, only on Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Atlanta Football Party, your home for the best Atlanta Falcons football talk. It's local insight you can't get anywhere but here at Locked On. I'm your host, Tenitra Batiste. Alongside me, our Falcons analyst, Jarvis Davis, Locked On Falcons host, Aaron Freeman, and senior Falcons reporter, Tori McElhaney. Today's episode is brought to you by the all-new 2025 Nissan Armada. Stay tuned for the Armada Player of the Week later in the show. And the Atlanta Football Party is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So, yep, we know they need an edge rusher, but the Falcons could use a different kind of edge too. We'll discuss that. Thumbs up, thumbs down, or TBD on the class of 2024. We'll wrap up our debate on that. But first, it wouldn't be a Monday if we weren't talking a little Kirko, right, guys? So we're going to start right there. There was an interesting article that just dropped from ESPN's Adam Schefter. He basically said what we already know. So this is going to be a little bit of Captain Obvious. The Falcons have said they're, quote, not interested in trading Kirk Cousins, but they'd entertain offers if the right deal was on the table. And of course, we know those discussions have been happening, but it's what's been asked in return per his sources that might actually dictate how things go. So Jarvis, just so we can give our listeners and our viewers kind of a quick heads up and inroads into insight into what that means. Falcons have asked for any acquiring team to pay $20 million of the $45 million worth of guarantees left on Cousins' contract. Of course, to date, no team has been willing to do that. But what happens this weekend, which franchises come out of the draft with or without rookie QBs, could influence how much of that guaranteed money a team might be willing to absorb. And we know those teams exist, right, Jarvis? We know that there's even a team in the New Orleans Saints, for example, that is in a little bit of trouble with QB1. We know there's another team a little bit further down the board, like a Pittsburgh Steelers team that is in need of a QB1. But Jarvis, maybe two questions for you. Number one, does this move the needle in terms of where you think Kirk Cousins is going to be come, I'll say even, Friday, if you will? And number two, when you hear those terms and what Adam Schefter is talking about, do you feel like that's still, it's just too rich for teams' blood?
Yes, absolutely. I think the Falcons playing hardball like this in particular. And you know what? Hey, Tori, you can put your hands over your ears on this one. I think Arthur Blank is a little bit too involved in this one, because when you think about wanting to get value and you think about investing from a business standpoint, just a pure business standpoint, like when you invest a certain amount of money into something, you want to get that ROI. You want to get a return on an investment. You want to be able to say, okay, I feel like I got good value. And I think everyone can agree that Kirk Cousins, we ain't getting no return on that. I'm talking about, we mean the city of Atlanta, the front office, Raheem Morris. I think everybody, just the trainer, everybody's like, man, hold up, bro, what you doing? So I think that the fact that they're playing hardball like this, they're putting themselves in a situation where they're going to be sitting up here looking at each other come July, at the end of July, when they report for camp. They were like, why you still here, bro? You still here? And then Tori gonna have to do write-ups about and ask questions about Kirk. And I know she doesn't want to ask questions about Kirk right now.
Here I go.
I know she doesn't want to do that. So yeah, the fact that the Falcons are playing hardball, saying you have to pay $20 million of that contract, man, you agreed to pay it. So it's like let's do 10. 8, 9, 5th round pick. Let's get it done. But no, I want to get some return on my investment. And yeah, y'all gonna be sitting here looking at each other in July like, oh man, you still here. Like that old married couple that should have been divorced 20 years ago. Y'all still sitting up here looking at each other crazy.
Such a great analogy. I couldn't have put it any better. But Tori, since Jarvis put it out there about the 10 mil, that's also what Adam Schefter was referencing. He said there's a feeling around the league that a team might be willing to pay down roughly $10 million. And then it might come down to how much a team would be willing to pay, might influence the compensation that it gives up. So, sort of the lower the draft compensation, the higher the payment, the lower the draft comp, and vice versa. But where do you feel like the realistic place is from what he's saying, if there's any reality of a possibility for this to happen?
So there are a few issues that I have with this overall report. I actually think that it goes against a lot of things that Raheem and Terry have said publicly. The opening line being that the Falcons are not interested in trading Kirk Cousins is fundamentally not true. And there are quotes on the record from Raheem Morris at owners meetings saying that they will not stand in the way of a Kirk Cousins trade and that you have to have a partner to trade with. So like, that first sentence is just wrong. So I'll say that to start off. Another thing about this is I think that none of this, to the point of Tenitra, what you were saying at the beginning, none of this is new information. This has always been the Falcons' stance in that they always were going to Jarvis's point, play hardball with this. They've already paid him that $10 million roster bonus. Yep. They already have said that they feel comfortable having to pay what they have to pay. He has $27.5 million that he is guaranteed this year. The prevailing thought has always been that you have to get to a post-June 1 trade in order for a team to take on a majority of that initial $27.5 million salary that he is owed this year. So all of that being said, none of this is new information. It's just kind of now like you have Adam Schefter being like, well, teams are not willing to pay that. We've known that. We've known that teams were not really willing to pay what the Falcons are having to owe Kirk Cousins. So at that point, it's what the more interesting piece of it is the compensation part of it. And that, Tenitra, to your point about like, okay, if they're not taking on a lot of his base salary or guaranteed salary, how much can they offset that with potentially draft capital or a player? And yes. I think overall, like if I'm Terry Fontenot, if I'm Raheem Morris, if I'm in the Falcons camp, I'm kind of really weighing that heavily because you know you've already accounted for all this money you're going to pay Kirk Cousins. Whether he is on the roster, whether he's off the roster, whether he's playing, whether he's not, you have put yourself in this position. This is the position you're in. At the bare minimum, go get some draft capital for him. Now, how much will that cost? You know, like how much would a team be willing to give up and how much can the Falcons realistically get from that? That's still, I think, to be decided, and that's still up in the air. But I think overall, I think that there were just a lot of issues that I had with this overall report being what it was and not really kind of being anything new. If we've been reading the tea leaves, which all four of us have for the last, since Kirk Cousins was benched in December, we're always just amounting to this. And it's still just a whole lot of nothing until there's something.
I could have said it better than that. I feel like you said, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head. It's just more conjecture 3 days ahead of when the reality sets in, meaning whether or not there's realistically an opportunity for any of this to happen that Adam Schefter said. Because when I look at it, I just kind of took a quick peek free because I was curious to kind of know where, and I said earlier, it might be like a Saints or a Steelers, could be like a Vikings or Steelers. And it depends because I'll look at the Steelers probably because I know that team best. Do they have even the proper draft capital that if that's what they put on the table was even appealing to the Falcons? Because at the end of the day, you're looking at them. Of course, they don't have a second rounder because of DK Metcalf. They're kind of heavier in the later rounds. They've got 1, 3, and 4. But then in the later rounds, they've got doubles. And so, yeah, it's a trade partner that also has to be appealing to the Falcons, not just the Falcons have to be appealing to them. So anywho, Free, I kind of wanted to look at that angle as well and say, yeah, I mean, it's not new information, but he just kind of makes us ponder again, what's going to be the most important thing? Like, does the draft capital or does the compensation kind of lead the conversation for the Falcons?
Yeah, and I think last week when the Browns signed Joe Flacco, this was kind of the writing on the wall where the Browns paid Joe Flacco $4 million, but it could go up to $13 million in terms of incentives that are not very, like, I think some of them are like, if they win the Super Bowl or something like that with Joe Flacco, he gets the full $13 million. So, I think those are what we qualify as unlikely to be earned incentives for Joe Flacco this year, but it's basically kind of telling you with the, let's say $13 million for Joe Flacco, $10 million for Russell Wilson with the New York Giants, Like, this seems to be the price. I know Aaron Rodgers went on Pat McAfee and said, I'd be willing to play for $10 million or whatever, and whatnot. So it does feel like we kind of have a price tag for what teams are willing to pay veteran quarterbacks. And as Adam Schefter reported, it's like teams don't want to go over $10 million because they know these are short-term options. This was information that probably the Falcons could have been useful to them like a year ago, but you live and you learn. But I think that's basically what this is saying. And so, as Tori's saying, as Jarvis is saying, if the Falcons are waiting for someone to come to their price tag, if they want that $20 million, I don't think there's going to, right as we sit here today, unless something crazy happens, it's very unlikely that someone's going to meet that $20 million price tag that the Falcons are putting out there. So there's going to have to be a give and a take, I think, at this point, if the Falcons are going to move on from Kirk Cousins, and we'll see what the landscape of the quarterback looks like. As we said, we'll get a lot more answers this week with the draft and who's going to take quarterbacks high, which teams are going to be willing. And so, as Tori said, as we get closer to June, that's going to be probably an opportunity for the Falcons to maybe make an adjustment, particularly when's the mandatory mini camp, like June 10th or something like that, somewhere around there. So, that's just kind of natural deadline that if you wanted to get a post June 1 cut or trade, I'm saying, and you don't want to have to deal with, Kirk Cousins, will he, won't he show up for mandatory mini camp? Like maybe that's your point where teams can call the Falcons, or the Falcons can call other teams, and we can get some adjustment on that. But yeah, I think sitting here today, if the Falcons are basically saying we're drawing a line in the sand that we're not going to trade him unless a team is willing to pay $20 million, I don't think there's going to be a team at this point in time that's going to cross that line. So I think there's still a lot more give and take in negotiation as far as Kirk Cousins' potential trade options go.
Jarvis, you had a slick look on your face.
Yeah, I feel like we're going to be talking about Kirk when that mandatory rolls around. I just got a stinky, funky, nasty,
and what
Taco
is
Bell at 3 o'clock in the
spirit
morning feeling
that gives us, what's that unctioning in your spirit?
Yes.
Why is that?
I got a feeling. It just stinks. And here's the thing. I feel like there's a way that we don't see this situation. We don't have to cover this situation, don't have to talk about this situation on a continuous basis. And I think Free pointed it out, laid it out perfectly. You got to be willing to give and acknowledge that you made a mistake. Because once you start to acknowledge that you made a mistake, the person on the other side can be a little bit forgiving. They can work with you. It's almost like marriage.
Who's to say that's not happening? Like, who's to say that's not happening?
That's right. You're right. You're right, Tori. You're totally right.
I tend to think that, like, every time that Terry or Raheem or even Arthur Blank at owners meetings is talking about it, they're like, this happened, and no one could really foresee that this was going to be the absolute decline of Kirk Cousins.
Sure.
And thank goodness the Falcons got Michael Penix, because otherwise you would have been up a creek without a paddle. But I do think that, I don't think there's anyone sitting there saying, even publicly, that the Falcons are like, yeah, this is not a great situation. Yeah, we're comfortable with kind of like what we have to do, but this is the situation that we put ourselves in. I don't think anyone's kind of been like, we're really happy that this is happening and that we really think that it's really great that this is happening. I don't really think that's actually the case. So when it comes to having these private conversations about potential trades for Kirk Cousins, I imagine that they're like, yeah, it didn't work here, and we're hoping that it works somewhere else. But at the end of the day, to Free's point about the market for veteran quarterbacks, especially one that had the decline of Kirk Cousins in 2024, it's just not there. And I think that's really not the fault of the Falcons at this point. And I don't really think it's the fault of the market either. I think this is how things have turned out. Yeah,
and I'm with you on that. To a point, because here I feel like what I'm trying to say is there is as you deal with this situation going forward, right? And the ultimate goal is to get Kirk Cousins off this squad, right? Or that might not be the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal might be able to get return on the investment. Okay, we get this team to pay that $20 million, if they're drawing a hard line right there, I don't think that's admitting your faults. You can say what you want to say, but if you're saying that, okay, we understand what situation we're in, we will prefer not to be in this situation. Okay, $20 million might be a lot. That might be a lot to ask. So, okay, let's go down to 15. All right, and even Adam Schefter's report was talking about the sliding scale, right? Okay, the more we have to pay of his salary, the higher the draft compensation. So I feel like that this report tells me that the conversations are being had, right?
Yeah.
I think that's fair to say. And I think that, being willing to have those conversations as we lead up to the draft, I would prefer, ideally, I would like to see this get done after day one of the draft. I feel like that would be the perfect sweet spot because you're talking about teams that didn't necessarily like any guys on that first day, in the first round. I feel like that would be ideal for Kirk. If he doesn't get dealt after the first round of the draft, I feel like this is going to be a long ride, and we're going to have to deal with it.
If there has been no deal made by the time the draft ends, I think that it is going to stretch really far. And it's going to be something where we're having to have conversations about mandatory minicamp and potentially, I don't even want to put it out there, but potentially into training camp, potentially into the season. And I'm not ready to do that. Personally.
I know that's right.
I can see the look on your face.
Nor do any of us really want that.
My opinions are my own. And I very much would like to see, I'm with you, Jarvis. I really am. I'm kind of let's just kind of move past. Thank you for the disclaimer. I appreciate it. Yes. I do think that it's got to run its course. You've got to be able to turn the page for Michael Penix, just as he's going into his first year as a full-time starter. I think that's the best thing you could do.
Right. And then you've got that other caveat where a report came out just earlier this morning, literally minutes ago, saying that Aaron Rodgers has reportedly been waiting on the draft to make a decision on his future. He would like to keep playing, but isn't going to sign with a team to be a backup. So it's that caveat, every time you think the conversation has gotten a little bit less granular, or I guess more granular, if you will, all of a sudden, a situation like what we find out about David Carr happens, or a situation like what we found out about Joe Flacco re-signing with the Browns happens. Aaron Rodgers now saying, reportedly, hey, I really am going to wait to see what happens for the draft. And so sometimes part of this is the Falcons waiting in the wings because they keep seeing situations transpire that kind of take a little bit of the kind of authority or a little bit of their
precedent.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think I've even said on this podcast, the quarterback dominoes that need to fall, Kirk Cousins isn't in the first 10 dominoes that need to fall in the quarterback conversation to where we get to talk about where he could go and what he could do. There are so many things. You talk about Derek Carr, you talk about the draft, you talk about Aaron Rodgers. All of those things need to settle. The dust on those things need to settle before the domino of Kirk Cousins can fall.
Exactly. Well, hopefully one of those dominoes falls in exactly Jesse Bates days away from the draft. I want to talk about it in a little bit of a different way, kind of have some fun with what I think Jarvis likes to call the clearance section, if you will. We'll talk about that when we take it under further review. This episode of our Atlanta Football Party is brought to you by Amazon Fire TV and Locked On. Did you know your Fire TV is also an Xbox? Turn any TV into your game and entertainment hub with Fire TV Stick 4K devices. No console required. Just grab your paired controller, subscribe, or sign in to Xbox Game Pass Ultimate with EA Play included, and you're ready to play. Dive into hundreds of premium titles from EA Sports College Football 25 to Call of Duty Black Ops 6 and Avowed as easily as you stream your favorite shows. It's gaming made simple, and it's all on your Fire TV. So with Wi-Fi 6E and auto low latency mode advanced technology, Fire TV Stick 4K delivers smoother, more responsive gameplay with lightning-fast speeds you need to stay competitive. And with 4K streaming, watch more than 1.5 million movies and TV episodes from your favorite subscribed services like Netflix, Prime Video, Disney Plus, Max, and more. And I got to tell you, I'm not necessarily a gamer, but I got one coming to my house in a couple days. My nephews will be here for their spring break, and they love to game. And I think it's really cool that they'll be able to game right there from their bedrooms, where we have Amazon Fire TVs and Fire Sticks. So head to Amazon.com/Fire TV Locked On to get started. Xbox Game Pass Ultimate subscription and compatible controller required. Available on select devices, including Fire TV Stick 4K 2nd Gen, Fire TV Stick 4K Max 1st and 2nd Gen, and Fire TV Cube 3rd Gen. All right, guys, we are getting closer and closer, kind of inching up to opening night of the 2025 draft. But I thought, Tori, that we would try something a little bit differently. And granted, we know the ebbs and the flows. Heck, we just talked about this morning how some of those ebbs and flows might dictate what's going to happen for the Falcons at quarterback in terms of what they'll do with Kirk Cousins. But also, that's going to dictate what happens at 15. So I was wondering if you had a chance to maybe consider more of like, not so much about position, Tori, or about best player available or anything like that, more about a player actually fell into the laps of the Falcons. Who would you maybe consider as a value pick at 15 that could fall into the Falcons' laps?
So I think it's interesting because I could talk about edge rushers all day long. I really could. And, I want to make it clear that I'm not saying if like, even these guys did fall to 15 that the Falcons should go after them.
Right.
But I do think that Jalen Walker, if he is there at 15, I cannot see a scenario in which you don't get him. I really don't think he's falling past Carolina at 8. I have said this from go. I don't think it's going to happen. But if he does fall past them at 8, and if he falls past the 49ers at 10 or 11, whatever they are.
Yeah.
If he can get past them and he's there at 15, I would absolutely let that happen. Some other guys, if there is a significant run on quarterbacks where the Saints, for example, take a Shedeur Sanders, or you see the Giants do something at number 3, I don't know. And you see maybe someone like a Will Johnson, arguably the best corner in the class, fall to 15. I think there's an argument for that as well. Even though you do need edge rushers, and I'm not discounting that. Even if Will Johnson is there at 15, I still may value some edge rushers over him. But those are two names that I'm like, according to how things shake out in the top 10 specifically, I would be very interested to see kind of what decision the Falcons ultimately make. Do you still value defensive line? Do you still value kind of what you need up front? Or are you kind of being like, you know what? This guy is the best player available at his position. Do you go after him? I don't know. Those are two names, Will Johnson and Jalen Walker, that I think if they fall, I would be very interested to see what the Falcons would do.
I kind of like that angle too, Free, where you're in a position where you decide to, this argument is for, or discussion is for the argument of staying at 15. And so you're watching the board, and you kind of see maybe multiple players who have value, and they're like right there in your grasp at 15. Who do you go with where you say, wow, that was an incredible pick at 15 that I got for value I didn't think would be there?
Well, I think Tori mentioned two of the more obvious names that are guys that are consistently projected to go much earlier in the draft. Another name that is also in that conversation is Mason Graham from Michigan. I think of the guys that are sort of consistently mocked in the top 7, he's probably the one that I think you could see a significant fall. Now, if he falls all the way to 15, I would be surprised by that. But I think the thing that Mason Graham brings to the table, having watched him, is like watching him play. I was like, he's very much like Grady Jarrett, and not like the Grady Jarrett that the Falcons drafted in 2015, but like closer to the Grady Jarrett when he was, further along in his NFL career. Yeah. And so it's like, if I'm getting like a floor of Mason Graham that is like, let's say 2017 Grady Jarrett as opposed to 2015 Grady Jarrett, that becomes very intriguing. We know the Falcons have a billion defensive tackles at this point in time, but like none of them, I think you can sit there and say, that's the guy. That's the guy that's going to replace Grady Jarrett at this point in time. David Onyemata is the veteran in the room, but I don't know that many people that expect him to be there long term. And then there's questions around some of the other young players that they have in that room. And so Mason Graham is one of those intriguing players that I think that if he's there at 15, you just kind of like, okay, we don't need to overthink this. Let's get the guy that, we know we have other more pressing needs at the edge, but this type of value is definitely worth this, especially for a player that is a high floor player. And that's, as Jarvis says, an immediate impact defender. That's exactly what you're looking for at that position. So I think Mason Graham makes a lot of sense should he somehow fall all the way to 15.
And Jarvis, what about you? I mean, we've seen stranger things happen where we've seen teams say he was on our draft board, but we knew there was no way in hell we'd get him because he wasn't going to fall. And all of a sudden he fell. So who would that he be for you where you're like, oh my God, Falcons can get him at 15 for value? Let's go.
I'm with Tori. I think Jalen Walker is a guy that comes to mind immediately because here's the thing. I'm real big on what Jeff Ulbrich wants to do. I know you talk about the multiple, all that stuff, but you have to have a foundation of who you are and who you want to be. And then once those things kind of go out the window on Sundays, then you got to be multiple and then be able to figure things out on how to stop this particular team because they've been able to take advantage of what you do and what you plan on doing on a weekly basis. So I feel like if Jalen Walker is sitting there and Mike Green is sitting there, who will they take? You got Jalen Walker, 6'1", about 240, right? You got Mike Green, who's closer to the prototypical edge size and 6'3", 250-ish, right? So I will be very interested to see how he plays that because one thing we're not really talking about, is Caden Ellis. He got one more year left on his contract. So am I thinking about Jalen Walker potentially replacing Caden Ellis in this defense, being that multiple guy? You kind of move around, stand up linebacker, can rush him up the middle as well and be effective getting to the quarterback that way? Or are you going to rectify the issue that's been going on? And I got a chance to watch. It was so funny when I was watching our NFL mock draft and I free picked the guy that I really appreciate if they would. He picked Mike Green, and he talked about 5, 10, 20 years. The Falcons have been one of the worst teams rushing the passer. Are they going to finally rectify that, or by drafting Mike Green, or are they going to go with a guy like Jalen Walker, who they didn't even expect to be there? So yeah, this is the type of stuff that I absolutely love, and I'm so interested in, and I hope it happens because. Guess what? I like to see where people stand because it's like, okay, there's value there, but here's what we're trying to do. Here's who we are as a defense, the foundation of a defense, and here's what we're trying to fix. We're trying to fix a problem. Yeah, Jalen Walker would be great, but oh man, what the plan that Matt Green has when he's rushing on third and long, that's what we want because we need to fix this issue and we need to get it fixed immediately.
Right now. On the flip side of that, or in addition to that, should I say, Tori, when we look at sort of that value pick, if you will, I mean, real quick, who would be a value pick for the Falcons? And this time I give us an opportunity out of that number 15 spot because the value pick would be, hey, they traded down, they were able to get some draft capital, but somehow they were still able to get this guy. Who would that guy be?
I think it would be Mike Green. Like if you can trade out of 15 and still have the opportunity to draft a Mike Green, that's pretty high on my list of things to do. I would also say kind of a Michael Williams. If you can trade out of 15 and still get a Michael Williams, even if you trade really far down and you really are kind of playing around with it, a Jahdae Barron. I'm really high on Jahdae Barron. I don't know how much he's like graded out amongst teams in the league or even this like the Falcons organization. I don't know how highly they have someone like him. Personally, I really like his play style and what he can offer a secondary. So those are kind of the guys that if you're out of 15 and you're in the back half of the first round and you're kind of in that like 17 to 25, 26, 27 range before I think the run on defensive linemen and edge rushers when it comes to like the Chiefs and the Eagles, like those last, the Lions, like those last 5 picks in the draft. I think if you could get above them and get a guy, like get one of your top graded edge rushers, that would be a big deal for the Falcons.
Yeah. And I think we all still like the intrigue and the opportunity free that would be presented to the Falcons if they could pull that off where, hey, we trade back, we get some capital, and somehow, some way we still get a guy. So if they were able to do it, trade back, get some of that capital, who would be that guy where you would be like, bet he is still him, but they got value from it?
Yeah, picking one specific guy is hard just because I think what Tori said is right, that if they can move back and still get one of those 4 or 5 top edge rushers that is still there on the board, whether that's a Mike Elway, whether that's a Mike Green, whether that's even a Shamar Stewart at Texas A&M, one of these guys that often you see sort of projected to go in the top 15 that's not necessarily being there if that guy slides. It's basically the idea of, you can stack these guys however you want, but it's the idea of even if your number, like let's say you have Mike Green at the top of that trio between him, Mykel Williams, and Shamar Stewart. But the conversation is like, would I rather have Mike Green or would I rather have Mykel Williams in a 3rd round pick versus Mike Green? And that's kind of the conversation where with this team needing as many contributors as they possibly can get, particularly on the defensive side of the ball, that 3rd round pick or whatever that you get on a trade back becomes extremely valuable for this football team, even though we all sit here and say we want them to get the best possible pass rusher in round 1. But if you can get, say, 10%, 90% the pass rusher that you could get sticking at 15 plus the 3rd round pick, I think that makes up the difference and gets you extreme value at that spot.
And Jarvis, I'll give you that opening as well, since Tori and Aaron were able to kind of build an option or a scenario where it's not so much just one player, but there could be multiples there. What for you would that look like as far as, hey, Falcons, you get to trade back, you get some draft capital, who are maybe some of those players that you would say, if you get him, or him, that's a value pick for what else, for the rest of the package deal that you got?
For me, it would have to be Donovan Ezeraku. I feel like there's that. I really like him as a player. I like the person too. Got a chance to, talk to him, have some conversation with him. I feel like he has an elite trait and he's just arm length. That makes so much of a difference when you're talking about going against tackles, in the NFL when the standard is you got 33 or better. Will Campbell is dealing with all those issues right now. So, but I think eventually he'll work out to where he'll still get drafted in the top 10 to 15, in my opinion, because he's just that talented of a guy. But I think that a guy that can combat those things and having that type of length, not necessarily the biggest guy, but the length matters. When look at Leonard Floyd, he's skinny as a toothpick. Let me take that back. Leonard Floyd is not that big of a guy, but he's a guy that once he got into the league and started working on his craft as far as pass rush specific and being intentional about that, he's been one of the more consistent pass rushers in the NFL. So I feel like Ezeraku is a guy, like Free talked about, if you compare a 3rd round pick with Ezeraku, I would like that. That'll be. I feel like the Falcons will be cooking with grease because there are a couple of little small landmines behind the Falcons because you got the Cardinals. I know they signed Josh Sweat in free agency, gave him a lot of bread, but they still need more. You got those waves at guys. I've been saying that for the Falcons. And then you got the Bengals as well. They still haven't paid Trey Hendrickson, y'all. So it would be nice to have a replacement if you're going to try to trade him. Like they said, hey, go find a trade, Trey. So you got to find a replacement for him. So I think there's a couple of little teams that the Fontenot has to be aware of when you're thinking about trading back because they might be sitting there waiting to pounce on the guy that you want. So, yeah, I think Ezeraku is a guy, being that he's not the top-rated guy from a consensus standpoint, but I feel like there's some good value there if you trade back. And pairing him with a 3rd round pick, yeah, I think the Falcons be doing really well if they're able to pull that off.
Well, you've heard it all up and through this show, all up and through this entirety of this offseason. We know they need an edge rusher, but the Falcons could use a different kind of edge too. We'll discuss when we take it under further review. This episode of our Atlanta football party is brought to you by Nissan. So if you're like me, you kind of like the big trucks, right? The big boys. And that's exactly what a Nissan Armada is. And each week, the big boy will help us to take a look at draft prospects, at least up to Thursday or this weekend, to pick a guy that stands apart. The guy we believe showcases the strength and power needed to push the Atlanta Falcons forward as we look ahead to next season. But we're going to do it a little bit differently this week. This week's Armada and clear-cut player of the week is actually a multiple. And I'm going to take you through real quick what Jarvis said earlier, what Aaron said earlier, and what Tori not only said earlier, but what she mentioned in her most recent mock draft 7.0 at AtlantaFalcons.com, where she said trade Falcons your number 15 overall pick with the Chicago Bears for the number 39 second round, number 41 second round, and number 148 fifth round overall picks, which just might get one of those guys that she called out that would be good for trade value. And then again, the Los Angeles Rams would have traded the number 26 pick first round and number 93rd round overall picks to the Atlanta Falcons for the number 41 and 46 second round overall pick. So who knows? Those guys could be a Mike Green, an Izaraku, a Jalen Walker, or a Michael Williams. But nonetheless, whomever the guy is, you want that guy to be just like an Armada. Heavy duty, rugged, conquering the road with capability and confidence, dreaming big and going big. So when it comes to the Nissan Armada, they say go forth and conquer. And that's exactly what I think Izaraku, Walker, Williams, or Green can do. It's clear that our player of the week is out there ready to conquer the road ahead with confidence, just like you can in all new Nissan Armadas or any of their outstanding vehicles with Nissan. So take the Nissan Armada, Rogue, or Pathfinder and go find your next adventure when you shop at nissanusa.com. All right, guys. So this is another one of those. If you watch the football parties, whether it's on Monday or Thursday, we have had this same conversation over and over again about this one intangible free that the Falcons need. And that's a dog, that guy that is just edgy. And we've all kind of come to consensus that's Drake London. We don't know if he has a counterpart of that sort on the defensive side of the ball, but regardless of position played, regardless of Falcons need, regardless of that player who is legitimately one the Falcons can or will draft, give me a dog that you love to see in a Falcons uniform on offense to complement Drake London in 2025.
See, you're setting me up, T, with the offensive question because when I saw this question on the rundown, I was like,
big time setup.
I feel like I need to dig
Wait. When I wrote it up, I actually at first had defense and I go, oh no, that's not triggering. Flip it.
Yeah,
so, accomplished.
I am properly triggered at this point in time, but I have dug deep into the well, and a player that I'm interested, I have had my eye on the offensive side of the ball since the Senior Bowl is Anthony Belton, the offensive tackle for NC State, and I know Dane Brugler wrote up in the Beast his breakdown that basically that he has a nasty mean streak that. It's important for him to have the most pancakes in a game every single week. And that's something I like to hear. I thought he had a great week of practice at the Senior Bowl, holding his own, going from a guy that, potentially was a day 3 selection that may now be in the conversation in that second, third round range for those teams that miss out on the tackles in round 1. And certainly as the Falcons hopefully will not be taking a tackle in round 1, but if they can move back in the draft, as we've discussed many times on the previous football parties, particularly if they can get like a third round pick, that gives them a little bit more flexibility to spurn the defense for one of those early picks and go for an offensive player. And at this point, Anthony Belton is the type of dog that I think makes sense for the Atlanta Falcons. So I was triggered by this question, but I did come up with an answer and finally settle on at least one guy out there that would not totally upset me if the Falcons went offensive early in the draft.
I still love when Free is a team player, and it's a struggle for him being a team player, but I love it when he's a team player. So, okay, Jarvis, I feel like on some level this might have triggered you slightly as well.
Yeah.
To have to find that offensive player. But if there was a dog out there on offense that the Falcons took in 2025, who would that guy be?
That guy will be Gray Zabel. the center guard out of North Dakota State. I feel like he was a guy that just really stood out to me down in the Senior Bowl. When you think about being able to compete, a lot of times you have those guys coming from out of the small school. And I don't know if we can call North Dakota State a small school because they've had a pretty nice run of offensive linemen coming out of the draft. And those guys been come into the league and being some legitimate starters. But I feel like but he still has that small school mentality. And when you have, I love guys like that. I call them chip on the shoulder guys who feel like they have something to prove every time they step out on the field. And that's Gray Zabel. And for another reason why I like him is because I don't want Ryan Newsel just to be gifted that starting spot at center. I just don't want to do that. I don't believe that guys should just be given positions, especially a right of first refusal guy that's on a 1-year deal for $3.2 million. I don't know. I don't know. So I feel like a competition is key in order for the Falcons to be in a good space to be able to have the offensive line that they want, the type of offensive line that they want to have.
What about you, Tori? Anybody on the offensive side of the ball where you're like, yeah, if we have that kind of edge on offense, it'd be a good look?
So I'll say this. Y'all know how I feel and where I stand about drafting an offensive player before day 3. So I didn't even entertain the thought of getting an offensive lineman in day 1 or day 2. So I want to preface what I'm saying by saying that. Like, I'm looking at guys who are true, like who I think could be true day 3 picks.
Yes.
And in terms of dogs that you're getting in day 3, I do think that you can still get dogs in day 3. Grady Jarrett, obviously. So my pick, I think, could be more of a strategic dog, like more of a German Shepherd that like you can get him there, like, but he's gonna be like very loyal and he's just gonna like he's just gonna hang out and like wait until like he's smart,
Yes.
And so
he knows when to attack. He's not gonna just attack.
Right.
Attack.
Correct. Yeah. He's not just going to go out there willy-nilly. So my pick is center Drew Kendall from Boston College, to the same point of what Jarvis was saying about how you need competition for Ryan Newsel. And I think that there have been many instances. I mean, Drew Dahlman, just in general, I think Drew Dahlman was he was a 4th round pick. And he turned into a guy who went and had, a pretty lucrative rookie contract in Atlanta and now a pretty lucrative deal with the Bears. And I think that you can get value at that center position in a day 3. And I think with Drew Kendall, I think he has kind of the mechanics of somebody that the Falcons would want to bring in for competition with an upside. He may not be the guy right away. He may not be the guy in 2 years, but I think that he could develop into something. And hey, Boston College, like, I don't know if they're known for having dogs, but Chris Lindstrom came from Boston College, and sometimes that guy can turn it on and be the doggiest of dogs there is. Oh yeah. So so my pick is Drew Kendall, but only on day 3. Yes. Only on day 3.
Yes, that is our caveat. And it's funny, Tori, because as you were talking, I was like, well, if you think about it, Chris Lindstrom and Matt Ryan have both shown different kinds of dog, but edge. Like Matt Ryan, there's a reason you called him Matty Ice, because the dude just had he had some dogs, some edge. It just looked a little bit differently. And like you said,
that's the Panthers.
Okay. Like for real. And look, ask the entire league in his MVP season ending for Chris Lindstrom.
Much the Bills too.
Right.
Last year.
Right. Exactly. They effed around and found out. And Chris Lindstrom, I think, really is another one who could give you that example, because his is more of, I dare you to beat me. I dare you to beat me off the line, and it doesn't happen. So no, I think that's a great one. And to Aaron, I'm going to take you guys back to your happy place as we wrap up, taking it under further review, and ask you on the defensive side of the ball, who would be that guy? Again, it's not necessarily about position or maybe who the Falcons would necessarily draft or could, because it doesn't have to be, to Tori's point, even a day 1 or day 2 guy, but just that dog who could just kind of bring that edge to the defense.
Yeah. And for me, like looking at a day 3 corner, Kobe Bryant, the Kansas, he went to the Shrine Bowl. He was one of the better guys at that practice week, showcasing some man coverage. You watching the film, you don't see a guy that's going to be a high level, like number 1 or number 2 corner. But like, if you're looking for a guy that I think can come in and play that nickel, that, as they say with the nickel cornerback position, is willing to stick his face in the fan. Kobe Bryant has that in spades. Like he's very reminiscent to me of Devon Witherspoon, who had that dog label a couple of years ago as a top 5 pick. Bryant isn't in the same category as a prospect, and probably will go somewhere between the 4th or 5th round. But in terms of just watching a guy that likes to get after, that likes to be physical, from Alabama, went all the way to Kansas, he would be a fun player in Atlanta and has that dog mentality to sort of compensate for whatever he's lacking from a purely athletic standpoint at the cornerback position.
Yeah, I got to go with a guy like David Walker out of Central Arkansas, 6'2", 260. He's a guy he's a heavy-handed guy, so that's what I like to look for when it comes to defensive linemen. So does the offensive lineman move when you put your hands on him? Like when you engage the offensive lineman, do you move? Do you jump? Like, and if they jump, that's what I like to call those jumper cables. They put them jumper cables on them, they tend to move, right? So, and that's what I see when I watch a guy like David Walker, and he like you said, he's another chip on the shoulder guy. I don't know if you see a trend here, T. I like guys who have that edge, just like I belong, but I could tell how you're looking at me, how you evaluating me. You don't think I belong, do you? And they just find it. They just find it. Like, yeah, you don't think I belong. You doggone call your coach and said, nah, don't mess with him. The offensive tackle. Yeah, you said I wasn't gonna do anything. You said I wasn't gonna be able to get to the quarterback. Don't worry about it. I'm gonna show you. I'm gonna show you what time it is. I'm gonna show you better. I can tell you. So yeah, he's one of those guys that I feel that I would just really like for the Falcons just to have him on the squad, because I'm all about throwing waves at guys. Even if once they go edge rusher in first round, just like the free guarantee. Hey, go ahead and get David Walker in the 3rd or 4th round. He might be sitting right there waiting for the taking.
So I have 2 names. The first one I think is probably going to be more of like a 2nd round guy that you could target, Xavier Watts, the safety out of Notre Dame. I think that I've watched a lot of film on him, and I really like what I see from him in terms of his overall versatility. And I think to the point, he doesn't have the measurables of maybe what you would want, but everything that he did at Notre Dame was impactful, whether it be on the field or off, whether it be becoming a big time playmaker for them when the moment like really mattered. So I think that and he had 13 interceptions in the last 2 years. If you can get your hands on the ball, for sure. Another name that I really have liked the more I've dug into, I think what a 3rd round pick potentially could be, 3rd or 4th, is defensive tackle Ty Robinson from Nebraska. This is a big dude. And I think to the point of, okay, what the Falcons need in terms of a true defensive tackle unit, I think that he is someone who plays with the toughness that I see every time he's on the field. Every time. I feel like he's giving 110% every single time that he's out there. And I really, really like kind of the effort that he plays with. And there are some times where I would rather have somebody who I trust has that toughness to them, that drive, that passion, than maybe 2 extra inches on their length. I sometimes would be willing to trade that off. So those are my 2 names, Xavier Watts out of Notre Dame and then Ty Robinson out of Nebraska.
Got it. So throwbacks are what we are here for as we wrap up the show. Going to look a little bit back before we look ahead when we come back. So guys, we're going to do our round robin a little bit different. Obviously, we've been kind of looking back at the draft that was in 2024, looking at that class. What do you think about that player? What do you think about them if they actually made it to the end of the season? Because some of them never really got to play, and expectations. I think that's kind of the most important thing, the expectations for those players heading into 2025. So Jarvis, I'll start with you, and you can pick any one or two of the players that we have left, because we didn't get a chance to talk about Braylon Trice or Brandon Dorlus, JD Bertrand, Jason McClellan, Casey Washington. We know Zion Logue obviously parted ways, but any of those players that you want to talk about in terms of what you expected out of them last season, or what you didn't get out of them last season, what you want this season from them?
I expect Braylon Trice just to be what I saw on tape coming out of college, right? I know that might be a big ass coming off an injury, or at least be close to that. And what I saw from a guy is a lot of effort guy, like effort, constantly moving his hands, constantly trying to work his hands, constantly trying to disengage with that offensive tackle. If he gets his hands on them, that's what you look for with those high motor type guys. Like, he's a high motor guy. So, yeah, that's what I'm expecting him to be as a player. Try to get back to being that guy that you were coming out of college, right? And then as you work your way towards that, then add the NFL, workouts, the specific, the intentional training that you can implement into your game so you can become a better player. Because there's a reason why he was taken in the third round, right? Because there were some things that were kind of missing that he didn't show on tape. So as you get into the league, you got the year off, you're working, trying to get back, going through all the rehab. And once he gets healthy, I feel like he could be a guy that can be a piece to this pass rush equation. Like I said, I'm all about throwing waves of guys. I don't want to have to depend on one guy to get home, So if he can figure out a way to do that, because like I said, I like what I saw on tape coming out of college. So, but the injury obviously left a lot to be desired. So for him coming back, maintaining health, obviously, and then working to get back to that guy that got you drafted in the third round by the Falcons.
And Tori, it could be any one, two, or multiples from Trice, Dorlus, Bertrand, McClellan, Washington, anyone that you want to talk about as far as how you felt when that player got drafted, or what you saw last year or didn't see, and what you want to see this season.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of kind of responsibility being put on someone like Braylon Trice and Brandon Dorlus's shoulders. I think they are kind of being spoken about as this next generation of defensive linemen that hopefully lead the Falcons from the Grady Jarrett years into whatever comes next. And I think both of those guys, specifically, having not seen them, and you could say the same thing about Ruggiero, having not seen them, I think to the way that the Falcons speak about them, they have very high expectations for who they could be. And I think that, I can't help but to look into that significantly, because we haven't seen them. Brandon Dorlus was a healthy scratch more often than he was not in 2024. Braylon Trice never saw the field, unfortunately, despite the fact that I felt like he was trending towards being a starter for this defense last year before his injury. So I think that it's a big question mark, all of these players. A lot of the 2024 draft class, it's a big question mark. Even Michael Penix, who's at the top. And I think that how someone like a JD Bertrand continues to fit in with this inside linebacker group. Jace McClellan, you never saw him either. Casey Washington, can he carve out a role for himself as a important piece of depth? In that wide receiver room. This is a year where I think overall, this 2024 draft class, you've got to see a step taken, because you're going to need to rely on them. You got by, for the most part, in 2024, and you had to make do with the injuries and having people up and down and, depth in certain places. But if we're not talking about the development and impact of the 2024 draft class at the end of the 2025 season, then I think that the Falcons are probably not going to be in a good position. They need them to step up that much. And that's the whole class holistically, not just, I think, some of these guys, but I do think someone like a Braylon Trice and Brandon Dorlus, Ruggiero, there's a lot on their shoulders right now. And we'll see kind of how that shakes out.
Yeah, because 2024, Tori, to your point, mostly to be determined as a class. 2023, you kind of felt like, okay, now the 2023 class, they're still kind of putting out some quality product, if you will. But 2022, I think, is a class where at this point, you might say, other than, of course, Drake London, maybe we'll give a little bit of a nod to Arnold WKT. But for the most part, that class, and Tyler Algier, Let me not forget him. But for the most part, you kind of had some underwhelming pieces as far as being this far away from when they were drafted. So for you, Free, kind of looking at 2024 and wanting them to be able to show improve relative to where the two classes before them were, kind of what did you think about where they were or where you want individuals or collectively that class to be?
Well, I think Tori's onto something because like the real thing that I always look at with these prospects is what are you when you come into the league? Because we always get enamored with player ceiling, but like you're like 4 or 5 years away from reaching your ceiling if you reach your ceiling at all. And so what's more important is your floor. And then to me, the other big factor is what type of jump do you make in year 2? Because that's usually going to determine whether or not a guy is going to stick long term in the NFL. Because like for a lot of these guys, you just kind of throw them in the deep end in their rookie and they're just head swimming. They don't know what they're doing. They're playing against, all pros. They're getting their butts kicked all the time. And you just kind of like, you just figure it out. And
Right.
then the game starts to slow down in year 2. And the guys that it really starts to slow down usually can make a significant leap in year 2, going from a guy that's like, yeah, this guy looks a little lost as a rookie to he's starting to figure it out. And I think the interesting challenge for this 24 draft class is you didn't really get those opportunities to throw those guys into the deep end this year.
True.
So to me, the question is, can they be in a position to make that sort of year 2 leap without that year of just basically flailing around in the water to keep the metaphor going? Or is this the year where they're kind of flailing around in the water? And as Tori said, if that is the case, that's not going to work out great for the Atlanta Falcons, just because they're counting on a lot of these guys, including Michael Penix, to kind of be significant pushers of this football team forward this upcoming season. So I think that's really where the question marks with this draft class come in, where you're just like, are these guys going to hit the ground running in year 2, despite not really getting much opportunity in year 1? Or is their year 2 going to be the year 1 that most guys have? And like, as we sit here today, like we don't really know the answer to that. And it's hard to kind of lean one way or the other, because you like all these guys in terms of what they can produce on the football field, but we just haven't really seen it yet at this point.
Yeah. And I think I think that's why we kind of coined it to be determined, because there is so much still out there for this class and what it could potentially be. But going back to, I wouldn't say it's the greatest class or a great class for the Falcons necessarily, but we'll call 1998 a good year, kind of a really good year for the Falcons. And Keith Brooking was one of the better draft picks that year, a first rounder at number 12, who will return to the Falcons in a different capacity. He will be making announcements for the Falcons for their day 2 picks for this year's draft, according to ESPN's Adam Schefter. So guys, kind of go back into your mental Rolodex and into your memory banks and riddle me this, Jarvis. If there was one previous Falcons draft class, it could be day 1, day 2, heck, day 3 if you want it to be, but that you could have announced picks for, which one of those Falcons classes would you have wanted to be the announcer for and why?
First of all, I want to start off by saying, as I started to go back and look at all these draft classes, I started to get a little depressed. There was some really bad draft classes, not picks, classes in the Falcons history for the past 10 to 15 years. I'm just like, oh my gosh. And then I tried to find my happy place, and I went back to 2008. And, I'll admit that I was a proponent of Mr. Glenn Dorsey, because he used to cause all type of havoc. This is how deep this doggone defensive line thing runs for me, y'all. It's deep. It's really deep. I've been calling for defensive linemen since 2008. Yeah. So yeah, do the math on that. So, but I said that, if I wouldn't have been able to announce Matt Ryan, the pick of Matt Ryan, or a guy like Harry Douglas, you know what I'm saying? Like, what?
Yeah.
Don't be, because Harry Douglas is all Atlanta. It's just
All
Atlanta. Like, it would have been good to do this, announce those picks, right? And Matt and Harry, that would have been dope. But I had to kind of get back into my happy place, because I started to look at some of those draft classes. I'm like, gosh, but yeah, that's where I would go back to 2018.
And you'll stay in the happy place if you're, as long as the happy place is 2008. What about you, Tori? Like, is there what draft class for you would it be that you would want to announce?
I also was going 2008. That was the one that I was like, really, you look back at that one, and I even wrote about it recently on AtlantaFalcons.com, we did like a question of the week, like what was your all-time favorite like at Falcons draft pick? And I said it was Matt Ryan, but it was a lot of like that draft class and the fact that for the next 2 years when that draft class was really young, you get back-to-back years of winning seasons for the first time in franchise history. And I think kind of what Matt Ryan ultimately ushered in. So that would be mine, 2008.
I like it. Free, wrap us up. What's your favorite draft class that you would love to go back and have had the opportunity to announce?
Well, I was going to pick 2008, but I figured everybody else would pick 2008. So I was just preparing to zig while everybody else zagged. So I'm going to go all the way back to 1999 because it's strong for the brand, right? That's the last time the Falcons took a pass rusher that they successfully developed in Patrick Kearney. And then in round 2, they took Reggie Kelly. They traded like a future first to get Reggie Kelly, a blocking tight end. And then on the 3rd round of the draft pick, they took a fullback in Jeff Polk, who didn't do anything in Atlanta, but it is strong for my brand. So that's the draft class I'm going back to. I get Patrick Kearney. I get a fullback. It's everything I dream of in a draft class.
Can I do an honorable mention, T?
Yes.
2016 draft. That was an amazing draft.
Which one was that?
That was one with Devondre Campbell.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Deion Jones.
Yep.
Keanu Neal.
Yeah.
Keanu
Neal. Yeah. So that was that young defense that marched on to the Super Bowl, right?
Yeah.
You know, they had so many starters. I think it was Arthur Blank said, I need 3 starters, in that draft. So, yeah, they ended up working it out, and it worked out for them. How about that?
I would probably – I'm sorry. Go ahead, T.
No. I was going to say, how about that? Yeah.
Okay. I didn't know if Tori or Free, if you guys had any honorable mentions you wanted to – okay. And my only honorable mention, because of course I would have gone with 08 just like you guys, was just 2015 because I was in studio. That was back in my producer days when Grady Jarrett got drafted. And one of the hosts, and Jarvis, you'll remember his name. I'm looking at his face right now. But anyway, one of the hosts over at 92.9. Say again?
Sam.
No. The long snapper.
So, Harper LaBelle.
Harper.
Yeah.
Harper would kill me if he realized that I didn't remember his name. But Harper LaBelle was on air at the time. So he was able to call Grady's dad. We were able to get him on the line, and we were able to talk through what that draft pick meant to him. And then just the lines buzzing about the excitement of Grady Jarrett, like homegrown. Didn't matter to Atlanta what round he came in. It was just the joy that was experienced through that. So just kind of being a part of that, I think, is cool. And then just the opportunity for the time that Grady was here after that, it was always a pleasure because of him and Mama Jarrett. But yeah, that's probably my favorite one, only because Grady was in it. And then to see, I'm always a fan of the underdog, to see what the underdog was able to do from coming out of that 5th round was just absolutely diabolical, if we're just being honest. Thanks to our everydayers for making the Atlanta Football Party your first listen of the day. Be sure to stop by Locked On Falcons with Aaron and his frequent guest analyst, Jarvis, as your second listen. And check out some of Tori's great work at AtlantaFalcons.com. We will see you on the other side of the 2025 draft.